So I've just started the recording. Yes, so I'm going to talk about 5 main areas, which are these. So when I employ a new teacher, I know that I'm probably going to need to help them with time management, teacher confidence or teacher presence, community membership. I will explain a bit more about that in a minute. Reflective practice and effective modelling. These are areas which I think as trainers we can also help people to develop during the course. I do feel like I might be preaching to the converted with some of these areas, but maybe there's little tweaks that you'd never thought of. So let's take time management to start off with then. So for time management, I think one of the biggest time sinks for new teachers is materials prep time. I get quite frustrated at huge amounts of cutting up little bits of paper when we're in the face-to-face classroom. I get frustrated by death by PowerPoint. And so I try and encourage trainees, firstly, to make sure they've completed all of the lesson plan documentation before they make the materials. The materials are the fun bit, but they're also the bit where you go down a rabbit hole. If you're short of time, you will create your materials more quickly. If you start with the materials, you'll rush your lesson plan. I also try to show the trainees how to teach lessons without PowerPoint, and I challenge them to teach at least one lesson during a course without PowerPoint, both face-to-face and online, especially if they're a stronger trainee. Weaker trainees, I try and get them to aim for 1 or 2 activities per lesson without a PowerPoint, because you'll have noticed during today, for example, I'm gonna not practice what I preach, but when the whole session or the whole day is just a PowerPoint with a little tiny video in the corner, or if you're on a phone, it's just the PowerPoint, you never see the faces of your teacher or anybody else, we need to switch the PowerPoint off. Another time management tip, helping the trainees to simplify their lessons. So I recommend a maximum of 1 or 2 all singing, all dancing activities per 60 minutes. If the trainees bring me a plan with more than this, I'll maybe advise them to get rid of 1 or 2 of these, even if they could tell me why this would be a fantastically, amazingly useful activity for their students. But once I've said to them, like, more than once, do you really need to do that many all singing, all dancing activities? They will start to reduce them, and they'll save time. Other time-saving tips, I encourage them to take screenshots or photos rather than typing out whole exercises, even if the typing it out might make it look prettier. Like, the materials can be a little bit down and dirty, they don't have to be perfect. I also show them hacks for a paper-based classroom, things like putting a coloured dot on the back of each set of handouts to make them easier to organise, or cut-ups if we have to use them. Other time management tips for trainees, introducing multifunctional tools like Quizlet, where they can create one set of materials, but they can be used in many, many different ways. That includes being able to print flashcards from a Quizlet set for a face-to-face classroom, or you can print a word list that the students can take away as well. If I'm using Quizlet, I also show the trainees how to find and copy existing sets, not start from scratch every time. That's particularly true if there's a common course book, something like English File or Face-to-Face. There are probably already Quizlet sets in existence for that. I also teach the trainees to save Quizlet sets with the book name, the book edition, the unit number, the page number in the title, so that they're easy for other teachers to find later. Other tech tips include creating templates for documents for things that you're going to use a lot. So they're reusable, they're easy to complete. So any of those things can save the trainees or the new teachers time. Another thing that I do is emphasize as much as possible how to exploit a single activity in multiple ways, rather than introducing new activities all the time. And this is connected to a task from ELT Playbook 1. So each of the playbooks have 30 tasks in them. Playbook 1 is aimed at new teachers, and it's all specific areas that new teachers often have problems with. So they always have a time, they have a short task, which I'll give you a minute to read. So this is a task that you could do during the CELTA course, or you could do it with new teachers. And we're going to have a go now. So I'm going to show you an activity, and in the chat box, which if I'm on the share, it's in your bar, click on more and you should be able to see the chat box. It might be hiding behind videos or something. Click on, go into the chat box, and what ideas can you think of for exploiting this activity in different ways? Let's have 1 minute to see what you can do or what you can think of. If you can't find the chat box, come on the microphone and let me know. Yeah, Cara, nice idea. Matilda, yeah. Yeah, change the nouns to other ideas, yeah, or the adjectives. If you change I'm boiling, how would that change the rest of the conversation? Yeah, personalization is really useful, really interesting. Yeah, grass skirts if you're in the paper-based classroom, yeah. Yeah, so in 1 minute, we've got 5 ideas. If you gave them 10 minutes and then got them to share ideas with each other, that kind of thing saves them time, reduces their prep time, and it gives them a whole load of activities that they can add to their toolbox. So I think just spending 10 minutes on that in in all of our copious input time or our feedback time, it can save a lot of time for the trainees, and it just helps them to realize how creative they can be as well. Okay, so the second area that I'm going to talk about is teacher confidence. Sorry, got a really dry throat. So, lesson planning. I really believe that trainers should intervene as soon as possible if the planning documentation isn't up to scratch, if they're writing a half-completed lesson plan, if they're, if they've got all the stages there, but it's got one sentence in each stage. Like, I know some trainers do it, some trainers don't, because they think that, I don't know, because the trainees should maybe be able to figure it out for themselves. But if I've seen a lesson plan in the first half of the course, if I've seen 2 lesson plans that aren't up to scratch and I haven't seen an improvement, I normally ask somebody else in the TP group who's understood how to write a lesson plan if it's okay to share that with the trainee that's having trouble. Because this is better, I think, than the generic lesson plan, because the weak trainee has seen the strong trainee teach that lesson, so they can see how having a solid lesson plan helps them to teach a solid lesson, basically. I think and it's better than the generic one, because the generic one doesn't come with a lesson, like they haven't seen how the 2 things match up together. I also believe that as a trainer, from every TP, we should always give them 1 or 2 specific areas to focus on in the plan, not just in the lessons. So what is it that's stopping them from teaching more successful lessons? What one thing could they change or add or improve or delete from their plan to make their lessons more successful? 8 TPs, over the course of 8 TPs, that is a lot of areas they can improve on their plan. And generally, I find that if they've got a strong plan, that means a successful lesson, and that means they're more confident. They can move towards less detailed planning later, once they've finished the course, once they've got the basics under their belt. But I do believe that a more detailed plan is a more successful lesson generally. Obviously, it can go to the other extreme. I'll come back to that in a minute. Another useful way to help teachers build their confidence is to give them rehearsal opportunities. And you can encourage them to rehearse things that they're nervous about, maybe with their TP colleagues, maybe by themselves in front of a mirror, maybe with you if really necessary. This is particularly true for complicated instructions, so that the lesson isn't the first time that they've ever tried to say those instructions or give those instructions. They have done it maybe 2 or 3 times, and then they do it in the lesson, having rehearsed, having practiced, and they feel more confident. A metaphor that I find can help them thinking about both of those 2 areas is the idea of the lesson plan as a film script. And that they're the director, or they're the screenwriter. So if they think of their lesson plan with knowing where everybody has to stand, what to hold, what to do at each point during the lesson, as you would in a film script, it makes them put more detail into their plan, basically. Obviously the flip side is that some people write far too much in their lesson plans. In that case, I would say to them that while it's useful to have this kind of script, improvisation is also an important part of great filmmaking, and the actors, the students, they need to breathe as well. It can't be all about the director or the teacher. And sometimes this can help the trainees to understand about handing over to the students more as well, that it's not, one thing I heard is it's not the Sandy show. It's not all about me. The camera's not on me all the time. The camera's got to flip around to the students as much as possible. So that metaphor can help them to improve their confidence, because if the students are doing more work, they've got more breathing space. The pressure's not on them as much. Another area to work on with confidence is wait time. Giving the trainees or the teachers tricks to increase the amount of time they wait after asking questions. So for example, getting them to count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 in their head after they ask a question. Or one trainee on our online course, he made a little post-it note that he had next to his camera that said "wait" in big letters. And after he had that, there was a huge difference within his lessons. So those little pauses of the wait time, they add natural breaks into the lesson. They give everyone time to think, the teacher and the students, and that can reduce anxiety a bit as well. It also means that the students are more likely to give some kind of answer, and hopefully even a successful answer. And all of that increases the teacher confidence, because they're not sitting there thinking, well, the students don't know anything because I'm a crap teacher. So that means that they then develop better teacher presence. It's all a virtuous circle. Another thing that I think is really important, and again, I think this varies a lot from tutor to tutor, but I'm increasingly leaning towards more rather than less, is the kind of support that I'm providing. So I think it's not a good idea to leave trainees or teachers, new teachers, to flounder over something, or to spend hours and hours trying to figure out how to do something by themselves, when 10 minutes with me will show them how to do something, and then they can spend that time refining it. I think this is particularly true of teaching grammar. So actually just show them how to present it, or show them how to lay out their whiteboard. And that does feel like we're kind of doing the work for them. But actually that means that you're adding to their toolbox. The teachers and the students have a better experience. And it means that in the lesson itself, yeah, okay, they might be teaching some of what you showed them, but they will never teach it in exactly the same way as you did. And they still have to think about how to do it all themselves, but at least they have a starting point. They know, where to begin from. And I think that's a really good lesson in scaffolding as well for the teachers. Like, we're modeling the scaffolding that we would expect them to give to students within activities as well. And actually, a lot of our in-house training at IH Bydgoszcz, particularly at the beginning of a year, we employ a lot of fresh off CELTA teachers, and it's all about supporting them to feel confident within grammar lessons, particularly. That's where they most struggle. Another tip that I give the trainees to improve their confidence in the lesson is to do the exercises in the lesson themselves as part of their planning, and make sure they know why the answers are correct, not just what the correct answer is. So any of those things can help improve their confidence. This is an activity that's a bonus activity on the ELT Playbook website that's connected to improving confidence. So again, I'll give you a minute to read that. So again, doing an activity like this, or giving an activity like this to somebody who's really lacking in confidence in the classroom, or who in their reflection is really negative, or even who's super positive, who never says anything negative, this can help them to maybe balance their self-talk, balance their confidence, and just help them to realise maybe that they wouldn't say those things to another person, so why are they saying them to themselves? I don't think it's a magic bullet, but anything that raises awareness can be useful. Yeah, this is also just to show you that every task in the playbooks comes with a list of reflection questions afterwards, and it actually comes then with 4 ideas for following up on it, a way for them to write some kind of blog post, something like that, maybe an idea for an audio or a video recording, a way for them to share some kind of image, like an Instagram type post, and then an idea for writing something in a private journal as well. So all 30 tasks in both of the books have that, plus this bonus task as well. Okay, so the next area is community membership. I'm going to apologise. I think I'm going to start yawning. It's 9:20 here and it's quite late for me, sorry. No, it's not coming. The yawn will come before I get to the end of this one, sorry. Okay, so the next thing that we need to support our teachers with is becoming a community member. So this is both about the local community, so that would be within the course, feeling like a member of the course group, their TP group, but also of the wider ELT community. So within the course, both online and face-to-face, I recommend that the trainees share phone numbers or share email addresses or Facebook, whatever form of communication they prefer, and they create a WhatsApp group for everybody on the whole course without the trainers. Another group for the 6 people in their TP group, and then if they're always in the same kind of 3 and 3 and 3 and 3, then another WhatsApp group for their 3 TP colleagues as well. And I do think it's worth explicitly saying that, because trainees don't think about it. There's so many other things for them to think about, and if you mention it to them a couple of times, then they'll create those groups and they'll start to get the support from each other, and they'll realize how much they benefit from it. When I do TP prep, I really emphasize like working together and sharing ideas within their WhatsApp groups, and make sure that when you do this, you ask so-and-so this because it will affect their lesson, or you tell them this, or maybe so-and-so could give you some ideas because they did a reading lesson yesterday. Like, I tell them explicit ways that they can support each other and help each other, because they don't always think about it. I am basically a dictator. I'm very I do think that we need to kind of point things out, because it's not always clear or obvious or common sense. At least if we point it out, somebody knows about it. If we don't point it out, there's no guarantee. I mean, another thing that's worth pointing out is you could also vent about this in your WhatsApp group. You can share the things that are frustrating you in the course so far, because again, people might not realize that that's something that's useful to do. I think it's super important to remind them that they're not alone, particularly in an online course. I noticed on the course that I did in the summer that a couple of trainees felt like that at the beginning, but once they started to take a more active part in those WhatsApp groups, they told me that they felt a lot better. There are a couple of student testimonials trainee testimonials on my blog where you'll see that experience described. Also reminding them that they're not alone after the course as well. So helping them to see communities that they can join, for example, the Facebook CELTA group, Twitter communities like ELT chat, maybe your organization has an alumni community, maybe things like the Teaching English British Council Facebook page. There are lots of places that they can go to ask for help. They could also do a task like this. Again, I think this is just designed to make them realize that they're not alone, that there are people that they can talk to. But also the last two are to emphasize that the people that you're thinking about aren't just to help you with your professional side, it's also to help you with the emotional side and the escape and the mental health as well, which I think are incredibly important. Particularly for CELTA trainees or TESOL trainees, because of the stresses of the course. Yeah, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so the next area is reflective practice. Now, obviously, this is designed to be a key part of the course, but I still think there are areas that we can think about as trainers. I tend to say to my trainees that I couldn't care less what else they learn on a CELTA course. I don't care if they can do anything else on a CELTA course, as long as they can reflect on their teaching, or at least attempt to reflect on their teaching. If they can reflect on their teaching, they will learn how to do everything else. If they can't reflect on their teaching, then they will never change, they will never improve. Some of the things that I do to help them with the reflection. I talk about managing their expectations, managing their stress levels. One of my favourite metaphors, or kind of two metaphors, that I use to help them with this is the idea of learning to play the piano or learning to play tennis. That when you sit down at a piano for the first time, you don't expect to immediately be able to play Chopin. When you start playing tennis, when you go onto a tennis court for the first time, you don't expect that tomorrow you're going to win Wimbledon. But for some reason, when we set foot in a classroom for the first time or teach our first lesson, we expect to teach perfect lessons, and we don't allow ourselves to be a beginner. And I think if you explain that to people who are being particularly harsh on themselves in the reflection, if you say to them, it's okay to be a beginner, and actually you've got to be a beginner to get to the higher levels, you've got to make mistakes, but you've also got to celebrate your successes, I think that can really help those trainees that beat themselves up in their reflection. Another thing that I try and do as much as possible is exemplify reflection myself, like model it myself. If I make mistakes in my lessons, I point them out to the trainees and I tell them like how I will learn from them. If there's an area that trainees are particularly struggling with, I talk to them about how I worked on that area. And that sometimes, for example, with timing, it took me years to be able to time things successfully, and I still struggle sometimes with instructions, that I didn't really learn how to give good instructions until I was a CELTA trainer myself, and I'd already done my Delta. So it's not to say that they shouldn't work on those areas, but it's not the end of the world if they don't get it in the next TP, that they're allowed to take time. As long as you can see improvement from one lesson to the next, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think, again, that reduces the stress on the trainees, on the students. Another area is the idea of strength spotting. So really focusing on learning from the strengths of other teachers and focusing on your own strengths as well. This is an area that I learned about from Sarah Mercer. If you haven't seen her work, I would highly recommend it. On the online CELTA course that I did in the summer, I was doing TP feedback using Google Docs, and I had I put the criteria that we were working on at that point at the top of the document, and I had the same thing duplicated 3 times within a single document. And I put the teachers into pairs at the end of each TP, with one person who taught and one person who hadn't. They had to talk about the other 2 lessons first, and then the teacher in that pair, then their lesson. So if A, B, and C had taught that day and A was in the pair, they talked about B's and C's lessons first, and then they talked about A's lessons. And as they were doing it, they had to fill in the Google Doc with strengths, as many strengths as they could think of from each person's TP. And then I said 3 areas to work on. If I ever got 1, that was kind of a minor miracle. Towards the end of the course, we tended to get 1 or 2 areas to work on. But the fact that they were having to list as many strengths as possible, and in my kind of oral feedback afterwards, I summarized like 1 strength and 1 action point for each person to work on. But with the strengths, I showed how the other trainees could do the same thing. I noticed a kind of a different degree of confidence from the trainees, and I definitely think that's something I'll continue to do in the future, like really focusing on the strengths. And if I was talking about action points, it was generally, I would say, either something that hadn't occurred to them, like wait time, or I would say, here's a thing that so-and-so did yesterday, and that's the next thing that I would like to see you do. They did it well. Now you see if you can do it well as well. So it was still connected to the strengths. There's a task in ELT Playbook 1 which is directly connected to strength spotting, but I'm not going to show you that now. I'm going to show you one which is about the specificity of your feedback, so I'll let you read it. This task was directly stolen from Kate Protsenko, who did a presentation at IATEFL a few years ago. She is credited in the book. Ever since I saw Kate's presentation talk, I think I've written the word good in feedback maybe once or twice. I've tried so hard to give specific feedback. She made me realise that when you talk about an unsuccessful lesson or an unsuccessful experience, you tend to give specific feedback. And you'll say things like, your intonation isn't clear, you need to use more varied intonation. or the model that you used when you were drilling was different every time, so the students were copying your stress patterns. But if they did it well, you might just say to them, good drilling. So I think it's really important for us to give specific feedback in our written and spoken feedback, including examples wherever possible. But also when the trainees are giving feedback to each other, have a little discussion with them about the use of the word good, and encourage them to think of specific examples. When I did this on this same online course in the summer, when I did this on the online course, from one day to the next day, the quality of their feedback improved by like 25%, I think, because they told me afterwards that because they knew they weren't allowed to write good or great, it made them like pay attention to examples and not just generalities. And I think that really helps them to be more reflective. Okay, so then the last area we have is effective modelling, or being an effective model. So we want the teachers to model good practice to their students. For example, good language learning practice, clarity of communication. But it's also super important that trainers should model to their trainees as well. I've already mentioned a few ways that we can do that, but I think there are a couple more that it's worth mentioning explicitly. So one of them is about owning your mistakes, owning your tech problems. Don't apologize for them, just acknowledge that they exist. We're not machines, we're humans. Highlight when we need help, when you need help. And just be a human being. Like, we don't need to be computers, because otherwise, like, what's the point of us even being here if Google could do it instead? So like, model being compassionate towards yourself as well. Model not apologizing all the time for everything. It takes work, it's hard to do, but it's so much less stressful for yourself as well. Like, since I started doing that, I feel so much better. I also think, and again, I think most of us are doing this already, but it's really important that we follow through on our own advice, and make sure that we're modelling what we want the trainees to see. So making sure that our activities are varied, that we're exploiting different functions of Zoom, for example, we're giving concise instructions, we're not doing what I'm doing right now, which is lecturing all of you. We are not over ICQing, we are on time, we finish our input sessions on time, we finish our demo lessons on time, although that one is still a challenge for me. That kind of effective modelling, I think, is really useful for the trainees to see. And again, this is a task from the teacher training book, which can help you to think about that. So in the book itself, once you have the mind map, there's a series of questions underneath, which will help you to reflect on the kind of decisions that you made during the lessons, and how that practices what you preach. Yeah, so if you want the full activity, obviously, please buy my book. So the 5 areas then that I mentioned: time management, confidence, community membership, reflective practice, reflective practitioners, and effective modelling. What do we do on CELTA then that's not here? The surface things, the teacher talking time, the ICQs, the CCQs, the power, the feedback techniques. Those things are all wonderful, and yes, we do of course need to tell the trainees about them, but they're not the things that I'm looking for when I employ a teacher. Those are all things that I can teach them when they come. These 5 areas are much deeper, and without these 5 areas, the other things won't happen. I also think these 5 areas are universal. They're applicable to any teaching context, online, offline, monolingual, multilingual, wherever you teach, whatever you do, you're going to need to be able to do these 5 things, or show these 5 areas. The other areas, teacher talking time and pair work and feedback techniques and all of those things, they are very much context dependent. Sometimes you'll need them, sometimes you won't. So I think as CELTA trainers, it's much more important for us to deal with these universals than it is potentially to deal with the specifics. And yeah, and hopefully the ideas I've given you today, they'll all be in the blog post, which is linked at the side, which is not quite written yet, and it won't be finished tonight. It'll be ready tomorrow, I promise, sorry. Those, apologising, which I just told you not to do, these deeper areas, they will be useful all the time. Yeah, and hopefully some of the tasks from ELT Playbook will have shown you how you can also support new teachers or yourself as a trainer to help develop these areas. So the link, either obviously subscribe to my blog, then you never need another link, but you can go to my blog and put in Life After CELTA some point after lunchtime, Polish time tomorrow, it will be there. And you can also get a 10% discount on the ebook version of both of these books using the specific discount codes that are here. Those are valid until the 5th of October. You can also get paperback versions of both books via Amazon or BEBC. And I would be very grateful if you can also mention the first book in your kind of professional development, Life After CELTA type session as a book that trainees can buy as well. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Has anybody got any questions? There's only 10 of us here. So I think we can come on to cameras if you want to. You don't have to switch your cameras on, that will be fine. But yeah, has anybody got any other ideas, any comments, any questions? Thanks, Phil. If not, thank you very much for coming. And yeah, have a nice evening, afternoon, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy.
Do you want to come on and say, yeah, Cara, I can understand the day was very long.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much. It was very nice to see you, Sandy.